Good morning, everybody. This is Suu-Va with the National CERT Association. Thank you for attending today's webinar. This is part 2 of a 3-part series on how to implement the hybrid CERT training correctly. The National CERT Association has partnered with the team at Utah to roll this out nationwide. Currently, I believe we're at 30 states and territories that have approved the training. If your state and territory has not approved the training, please go ahead and have your CERT coordinator email us at info@nationalcert.org. And you can check the onlinecert.org website for a list of states and territories that have approved the hybrid CERT training. Next slide, please. Once again, FEMA has approved the hybrid CERT training for use, provided that the state and territory CERT coordinators have also approved. This is an optional training, so it's not mandatory. States and territories that have approved the use of this hybrid CERT training can allow the programs to utilize it at their discretion. This also does not preclude them from creating their own online CERT or hybrid CERT training, provided that they get FEMA approval as well. Next slide. Just a quick reminder, the hybrid CERT training was created by the Utah University as well as Utah Division of Emergency Management several years ago. And the NCA partnered with Utah to do a national rollout because we saw that it was a great resource for all CERT programs. In the state of California, which I'm actually from, we actually partnered with the team at Utah to also provide some additional functionality. So we're providing the triage module, which was removed because the training was updated for the 2020 curriculum, but triage will be added back as an optional module. We also added additional ADA accessibility features, especially when using on your mobile phone or on a tablet. By the end of the year, there will also be availability in Mandarin. So right now, the training is available in both English and Spanish, and we'll have it available in Mandarin as well. And it will also be hosted on the Learning Management System at Cal OES, which is the State Emergency Management Office in California. We do encourage that other states take the training on the Utah LMS. And if you're in the state of California, you have the option of using either the Utah LMS or the state LMS. All changes that are going to be added to the California version will also be added to the Utah version. So you're essentially be getting the same versions. This will increase the redundancy. So if for some reason one of the LMSs had a power failure or was turned off or no longer able to host the training, you can use the other LMS as well. The training is free on both LMSs, and you'll be getting the same certificate on both LMSs. Next slide. Really quickly, this is all the partners that were involved in making this training happen, starting with the University of Utah, which received a grant to create this program and partner with the Division of Emergency Management in Utah. The vendor was 360 Immersive, which did a great job in creating this online training. If you have tested it, you will notice that it is very different than the other online trainings that you have taken, like the ICS 100 or 200. Instead of the participant reading everything, they actually will hear a voice lecture to them as they view a PowerPoint slide or view video. So it's very similar to a classroom environment. Additional partners such as Merit made it possible to provide a digital certificate upon completion of individual modules, as well as completion of the entire training itself. And of course, in California, Lisa's California campaign, which is a governance campaign in the state of California, helped fund some of the additions for this training. And I believe that's it for me. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to James Ray and Rachel Brown. James and Rachel are going to be the national program managers for the hybrid CERT training. As we roll this out to all the different states and as we add additional features and modifications and guidance, it'll all kind of go through the Utah team. This is to make sure that the training is consistent and also to make sure that the training is carried out in a way that FEMA approved it. So very similar to how there are guidance on how to deliver CERT basic training, there will be guidance on how to deliver the hybrid CERT training. Last week, we had a webinar that talked about the training overall and what's available to program managers and how to roll it out. And you can refer to that training via a link on the onlinecert.org website. Today, we'll be going over how to do the in-person portion, so the hands-on skills training and demonstration, along with the disaster simulation. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the differences between a classroom-based delivery with the lecture portion and the hybrid CERT training delivery, so that you're better equipped to know how to properly roll this out in your program. With that, I'm going to turn it over to James and Rachel.
Thanks, Suu-Va. As Suu-Va mentioned, I'm Rachel Brown, the hybrid CERT training National Program Manager at the University of Utah Rocky Mountain Center for Occupational and Environmental Health. And if you do have any questions, feel free to email me at onlinecert@utah.edu. And as we mentioned, James Ray is our subject matter expert at the Division of Emergency Management. James, do you want to give us a quick intro as well?
I think that is good, and I'm very appreciative to be able to be here with all of you and to be able to help discuss this matter with you. Fortunately, I've been involved in this process since its inception and have been able to see all of the materials from top to bottom. And we definitely hope to be an asset to you to be able to help answer questions and any concerns that you may have after the webinar. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, James. Next slide. So these webinars will be available at onlinecert.org, the recordings and the presentations, and the slides will also be available on the Google Drive that you can find on the program guide. Next slide. And as Suu-Va mentioned, the program is grant sponsored by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, University of Utah Rocky Mountain Center. We have a partnership with the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, Texas A&M, and the University of Michigan. It's the Prevention, Preparedness, and Response Consortium. As Suu-Va mentioned, the timeline for the webinars. Last week we had the nationwide rollout, and today we'll be talking about how to implement the hands-on skills training and disaster simulation. And then next week will be our last webinar on the traditional classroom, delivery, and hybrids. So there will be certificates available. We definitely recommend everyone complete all the webinars to get a certificate. They'll be available after next week on the last webinar. It will be a digital merit certificate, and then we will be sending out a link to everybody. And here's the list so far that's up to date for all the states that have approved the program. An up-to-date version will also be available at onlinecert.org. So if you do not see your state listed, also as Suu-Va mentioned, please contact your CERT state coordinator, or you can also include their information in the chat box or email the information to info@nationalcert.org, and then the National CERT Association will contact them. If you do have any questions, you can contact them at info@nationalcert.org. And just as a reminder, please give us your feedback. We would like to know your experience, the value, what you got out of the training, and any recommendations on how to improve the training. The data will be used to develop a publication and data analysis, and the feedback is available also on onlinecert.org.
And Rachel, if I may add, with your feedback as well, that does not just include the online portion. It also includes all of the program guidance and how you were able to roll out.
Hey, James.
Yep.
James, the quality of your mic is pretty bad at the moment. I don't know what changed from when we were testing it earlier to right now, but it sounds a little bit muffled.
How about now? Does that sound okay?
I think it's not as good if you're up to it. Maybe farther away, but try to speak louder.
Testing that. Does that sound okay?
It's doable, I guess. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything else to do. It's so weird, right? We did have an issue testing it, and now all of a sudden it sounds bad. But let's keep going.
Yeah, next slide, please. So as James mentioned, on the onlinecert.org website, you can view the course, the flyer, the program guides on there, the approved states and territories. There's an FAQ on there. It's also available in Spanish. And then we would also like feedback from both students and the program managers. There is a donation option if you'd like to support the program, conduct training in times of pandemic. And then also I do have I've had a lot of requests for the recordings, and the last webinar recording is on there available, as well as the slides. Next slide. Just a brief description of the program. It is comprehensive to the FEMA 2019 National Standardized Curriculum. It's 12 hours online and 16 hours hands-on. And then the steps to complete it is first you sign up with your local hybrid CERT program. And then you complete the online course on onlinecert.org and then email your digital certificate to your program manager, pass off the skills portion, and then the local program will give you your final certificate. As James mentioned last week, the program benefits. It reduces the program administrative load, it promotes standardized course delivery. Students can complete it at their own pace and convenience. It makes training more public available to the more rural areas. It provides a way for students to make up missed units. The units are individualized, so you can take them out of order. And then it's also a good refresher tool for trained CERT members and a great option for workplace and school-based programs. Next slide, please. And then right now, I'll turn the time over to James. Thanks, James.
All right, and I do apologize about the sound. Is that still sounding pretty bad?
It's workable. It's not clear, but it's workable.
Okay, all right. It may be because of internet kind of going up and down, and I really apologize about that.
Hey, James?
Yes?
You know, there was a suggestion. Do you want to just call in with your cell phone and use that? That'll probably give you a clean sound.
Let's go ahead and give that a shot.
So just to advise you, if you go to your audio options, you'll see a participant ID. So when you call in, just type in that number, call in the meeting ID, and then that participant ID, and that will connect you with your Zoom webinar. And that way you still stay as a panelist and your sound should be clear. Thank you for that suggestion. You know, I'm actually calling in myself, and I don't know why I don't think about that. So let's give it a few minutes for James to call in. While he does that, I will let you guys know I am capturing your questions. So if you have any questions, put it in the chat box. If it makes sense for the presenters to pause and answer it on that current slide, we'll do so. If not, we'll wait till the very end to answer the questions. And we'll also be adding most of the questions into an FAQ that you can see on the website. So we're updating it with questions from the webinar.
James, do you want me to continue while you're calling in?
Oh yeah, if you have anything to say in between now, then I'll, as soon as I get called in.
I'll just continue with the next slide. So hybrid CERT is not all online. It is online, not all, just all online. It's online and the classroom. So there's 9 units. It's estimated 12 hours total. The 9th unit is the final exam that you will need to pass by 70%. And then the classroom portion, there's 70 skills checklists, and that's estimated about 16 hours. And then James, can you click to the next slide? So how you prepare for the course will change how you conduct the course. So set the right experiences and expectations. So recruiting and advertising for your program, course registration, setting up your agenda, preparing course materials, and preparing your instructors, and then reminding your students. James has everything on the program guides listed in the, on the bottom, there's a link with the Google Drive. And also there's a timeline of how to complete all these things and templates available. We'll do the next slide.
Sorry, asking James to do that slide.
Did you get in, James?
Danielle, can you
Awesome.
put me on speaker with my phone?
We can hear you, James.
Much better, yeah.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Okay, that's still operating off of my computer.
I think you sound fine if you just keep
I
going.
think it's fine, yeah.
Okay, well then we'll go with that. I'm not sure what happened, but now I'm back on and things are working out okay. And thank you, Rachel, for covering me for a moment there.
Is that anything in this?
And just as Rachel said, and this point, I just want to reemphasize as well, how you prepare, that component of preparing beforehand does actually impact how you conduct the course. And so the advice at this point would be to make sure that you take enough time to fully review all of the materials that we're going to be showing you. The verbiage that is provided for the registration platform, how you recruit, all of those things are setting up that expectation management side of things for your program to suggest, hey, the students aren't having that normal classroom-based environment that we experience with the traditional class. So we need to communicate with them clearly so that they're prepared to do that lecture portion online and then come to that classroom portion, and that they know what that's going to be like. Yeah, the way you set up your agenda also will impact, and as we'll show, there is a sample available that will help you kind of use some of those best practices. There's the course materials that need to be used, and there's a large section of preparing your instructors, because all of your instructors need to be able to handle each of the various skill sets, and getting them ready for that is very important. This is just an example of a timeline that a given program might experience. Granted, if you give your students enough time to register for your course and then take the online course, nature of people, there may be some programs that say, hey, let's go ahead and get as many people to go ahead and start the online course, and we might tell them a date for the hands-on portion later. It's up to you, but as described in the last webinar as well, the suggestion is that if there was a time gap between when the students took the online portion to when the classroom portion started, if that's between 6 months to a year, there is a suggestion that you have the student retake that online portion. The reason being is because, you know, if we don't use it, we lose it. And we want it to be as fresh as possible, but we understand, given the circumstances, that there may be a little bit of a time gap. But having a time gap of up to 3 months between when a student took the online training to when they took it in class, we weren't seeing much by way of problems or questions or concerns from the students. They were able to catch on actually fairly quickly as they're reminded of those principles as you go through those hands-on skills. You'll notice that that classroom portion, when this is the part that you are preparing to conduct. And that classroom portion is actually the smallest portion of the entire timeline, because you only need to get it done within a 16-hour time frame. How you break that 16 hours out is totally up to you, as described in the previous webinar. But the suggestion with the best results was 2 8-hour days to complete those 16 hours. In preparation for, obviously, here's this section right here that says, hey, you would need to do a cutoff time when students stop registering, so that you give those last students that registered at least enough time to complete the hands-on portion. Obviously, the students are experiencing that online portion at their pace, their convenience, but you want to give them enough window room before they get into that hands-on classroom time. And giving the students repeated reminders is really helpful, so that you can communicate with them and say, hey, be sure to complete everything before the classroom time frame starts. And then also remind them to get their certificate. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to step in real quick because I see a couple of comments where people are referring to the amount of time it takes for the in-person training. And I want to reiterate, just like when you're taking CERT Basic, if you look at the instructor guide for each module, it'll tell you the recommended amount of time. FEMA's guidance for CERT Basic is that all modules have to be taught. They don't say that you have to teach it to 21 hours and no less. And it's going to be the same thing here. 16 hours is suggested based on what they've seen and the implementation in Utah, and seeing how long it takes to properly go through the full checklist for the skills training and demonstration, and how much a disaster simulation typically will take for a typical class size. Your time may vary. And I see some comments saying, oh, we're in the middle of the training now and we're planning this much time for our in-person portion. I want to say for your first time, you definitely want to plan more. Don't think that, oh, they say 16 hours, but we can get it done in 8, so we'll schedule for 8. Because your students will not let you err in more time. They'll let you err in less time. So if you schedule for 8 but finish in 6, they're happy. They get to go home early. But if you schedule for 6 and you need 8, the students are going to need to go home because they plan for babysitters, they plan for events after the training, they plan for the rides. So I want to err on the side of caution and see how long it takes for your program based on your experience with the instructors, based on how you interact with your participants, based on your type of participants, how long it typically will take. This 16 hours is pretty safe based on Utah's experience. So I want to say maybe it's plus or minus 2, but it's definitely not plus or minus 8, right? There's really no reason why they would think 16 and you can really get it done in 8. Now, as you get more and more programs implementing this training, we might see that the standard deviation might be plus or minus 4, and we'll update the guidance based on that. But please make sure you're not skipping any steps. And they're going to show you the in-person portion, all the different skills you have to go through later on today, and what's optional and what's not. What is not optional is based on when you take the classroom-based training in the manual, it says do this exercise. It doesn't say optional, it says do this exercise, do this training, do the skills demonstration. And that is what Utah has done. They've taken the book, gone through all the full list of what's required and put it on a checklist for you. So that when you bring people in, you're showing them and demonstrating these skills and having them demonstrate it back and then doing your disaster simulation. Now we know disaster simulation can range. Some people do it in 4 hours, some people do it in 2. You could probably get it done in an hour and a half if you really wanted to, right? But we're just saying, hey, to be safe, this is how long it would take. The last thing I want to comment on before I turn it back over to James is the total time. The total time for this estimate is 28 hours compared to an estimated 20 hours for CERT Basic. Now that depends, right? We're saying 12 hours of independent study, but some people might be able to get it done in 10. Some people might get it done in 16. Some people, if they're doing it while they're watching TV, it's going to take a little bit longer. But the estimated time is there for a reason. It's how long they've seen it in practice. It might be slimmed down just a little bit, but it's an option. It's an option depending on whether or not you think this kind of training will help you reach your participants better, or that you implement this during the pandemic and you're saying, hey, this is the only way for us to do training. It's not meant to be a better option than classroom-based training overall for everybody, right? It's not the, oh, forget classroom-based training. Here's the new training. It's better. It's short. It's slightly shorter. It's not. Because of the nature of the way the training is, it's going to naturally be a little bit longer because of inefficiencies of them doing independent studies and you having to repeat some of it as you're doing the in-person portion. But it might be a good way for you to be able to cast a wider net or to save on your own instructor time, because now instead of having instructors teach 20 hours, you're having instructors teach 12 hours or 16 hours, right? You're saving a couple of hours there. And for that, that is a key feature for a lot of programs where they're paying for first responders time and a half to do this. Or they have civilian instructors that can only donate so much time. And they're saying, hey, but we have so many more people to train. Well, if they could do a portion by themselves, then we can do more training overall. And that's where this training is going to be a great option. If you're asking about how you can mix a module here or there with the hybrid training with classroom-based training, we did cover that in the last week's webinar. If you have time, we can reiterate it today, but I don't want to spend time covering something we spent a lot of time covering last week unless we have time later today. So that's all I wanted to mention. Thank you very much. And James, go ahead.
All right, and thank you, Suu-Va. I totally agree. That student is spending an average, that's an average of about 12 hours online. And obviously they're doing that portion, that's the lecture portion. They're doing that portion at their own pace and convenience. But what you as program managers are responsible for is everything that's left over after all the lecture portion is done. And our estimations are stating 16 hours worth of hands-on. And that's just from one activity to the next as described by the instructor guide. Our advice is to not go less than 16 hours. You might be able to do that, but programs that were doing it shorter were finding they were skipping content or not providing enough time for the students to actually get the experience that they needed. So don't shortchange your students, and we'll show you why as we review the instructor guide CERT skills checklists. When we go through those skills checklists, you'll kind of start to see why it takes a certain amount of time. And if you review the instructor guide CERT skills checklist, you'll realize that it's about 13 hours of all 70 skills getting checked off. And then the remaining 3 hours was the estimate for the disaster simulation at the end of your class. So how you use those 13 hours is totally up to you. How you do your disaster simulation is also totally up to you. But the FEMA guidance, as Suu-Va said, the goal is to make sure that the students have been exposed to all of the content and that they have learned it. However you set it up to make sure that that happens is up to your program to do that. But this timeline is obviously just an option of that. From the last webinar, we covered 1, 2, and 3, and I'm just going to do just a slight refresher of number 3, where we're preparing for the hands-on classroom portion. Because it is so tied in with number 4, which is conducting that hands-on classroom portion. Again, number 1 and 2 is about the registration side of things and getting your students to sign up and then take that online experience. And then 3 and 4 is preparing for that classroom portion. So we're going to talk about those 2, 3, and 4 today. Some of one of the best tools that will be there for you is that program guide, the instructions for how to conduct the classroom portion of the training. And so use that program guide to help benefit you. There's the segment of preparing your agenda that we talked about in the last webinar, and preparing your instructors and the students as well, and getting the classroom materials and the props that you need. Here's the program guide, just to kind of show what that looks like. Please go to the program guide, review it, read it. Inside of this single document are the links to all of the various tools that are described, and that's in the full toolkit. Also, down at the very bottom is the link to the toolkit itself. It's a Google Drive folder, publicly facing, so that all the programs can utilize all the tools therein. Here is the Google Drive folder itself, so that you can kind of see those tools. Hopefully you take some time to kind of review those and make sure that that you see all of those tools and discover ways that those tools can be utilized to help you out. A lot of the work has been done on a lot of the tools to hopefully make it possible for you to then just tailor it to meet your needs. Now, all of these tools are provided here. The way you would access them is simply by making a copy for yourself. I'm going to talk about the skills checklist again, and we're going to actually be referring to the skills checklist throughout today. There are 70 items to be checked off. There's the online course completion certificate that has to be received and checked off. There's all of the comprehension activities and the skills from units 1 through 8 that have to be checked off. There are specific local program info that is different from one jurisdiction to another that you might have to decide on. That includes those local hazards, your local program plans, the ways that your volunteers get involved, other training opportunities, and there's also the disaster simulation that has to be checked off. And there are 2 checklists that you as program managers would be utilizing throughout this. One is for the instructors and the other is for the participants. And they both mirror each other. Same information, both directions. The only difference is the instructor guide then has some additional information to help the instructor. So let's take a look at that. Here's the instructor guide, the CERT skills checklist. And again, these slides are provided to you in that same toolkit. So if you want to go to that toolkit, download the slides. Those slides have all these links in them so you can actually click all those links. Or if you go to the program guide, all of those links are there as well. So you can actually pull up any of these and utilize these as we even go through this. Again, the first 2 pages are some instructions to help the instructor utilize this tool. The last 2 pages is the tool itself with all 70 skills listed in it. Here, let me kind of expand this out so you can kind of see it a little bit better. The number for each skill is on that side, as you can kind of see. So there's 70 skills. The unit is in this column, so you can see them kind of separated by unit. And then the descriptor also includes the page numbers for the participant manual, as well as the page numbers in the instructor guide where you can find that content. That enables your instructors to be able to turn to those pages as they prepare for those skills to be able to know exactly what it's wanting them to do. And then also enables your instructors in the classroom to point your students to the correct page in the student's participant manual so that the students can follow along, kind of get that refresher, see exactly where the content is, and then follow those steps as described in their participant manual for how to conduct that skill appropriately. Next slide is the participant checklist. If you click on that link as well. You'll note that the participant checklist is almost exactly the same as the instructor guide. The difference is that the student can put their name on this. This is their checklist that the student has to own and use. And the instructors would then initial and date every single skill that they come across to make sure that the student has performed all of those. And you'll notice in this column, you can see the number associated, that matches the number in the instructor's version. And then the unit, and then also the page numbers that the student can find in their participant manual. The agenda, there's the sample agenda that's available as well. but your agenda is impacted by a couple of items. You'll want to use the instructor guide CERT skills checklist and the basic CERT course instructor guide to prepare the supplies, the scenarios, etc., that's needed for each activity. You will need to decide on what you want to do with number 2 and number 3, as well as the optional items. So for example, if you go to the CERT skills checklist and you go to skills number 2 and number 3, you'll realize that both of those have some preparation that's needed for it. That includes local based information that you want to tell your students. And it's up to you to provide that information. What that information constitutes will impact the time measurements inside of your own agendas as well. And so having your instructors ready for that is really important. Also, you'll notice the optional items, like line 13, item 13 and 14. There are some optional segments in there. If your program decides whether or not you want to do that, then that makes your time frame go up or down, or you need to add those and give sufficient time in the agenda to be able to allow for that.
Hey, James?
Yes,
Can you go back to the skills checklist real quick?
absolutely. One moment, the presenter thing is coming back up.
So I saw Ken in the chat box noted that on the skills checklist, it references the page numbers based on the instructor guide as opposed to the participant manual. Is the intent that the instructor is the one referencing this checklist as they're showing the participants how to do it? But I was under the impression that they're checking it off, right? So should it be participant manual in most cases, or do you show both the instructor guide and participant manual in all cases? Just to make sure that the user looking at this skills checklist is able to find the right page based on the manual they have access to.
Yeah, so like for instance, line 13, you'll see that it only has an instructor guide reference on it. And what I'm looking at right now is the instructor guide CERT skills checklist. But if you go to the participant one and you look at 13, it's there still, but it is optional. So it depends on your program if you want to add that in. There is no page number in the student's participant manual for that particular one. In this case, it's up to your program to determine if that content is to be added in. You would then have to present that content in lecture form separate from the rest of the skills.
Okay, so the page number is shown if it's in either book, you'll show both. And if it's only in one book or the other, you only will show that one book. Great.
Yep. Yep. So in the instructor guide, if you see it in both manuals, then it is in both. If you only see it in one version, then it's only in that one. It doesn't give it in any other. So number 32, you'll see that there's only the directive in the instructor guide. It doesn't give any directive in the participant manual.
Okay, and one more question before you move on. Someone asked if the time estimate you gave is based on a certain class size, and if there's a recommended class size for the in-person portion.
Yeah, actually, we will be talking about that here shortly. But what we have found is if you utilize the best practices that we're talking about, the class size actually has no impact on the time frame. But that's utilizing a one instructor for every 6 student classroom ratio. Then you can have as many students or as few students, it still takes the exact same time. But I'll explain that here shortly.
Okay. Also, one more question about the toolkit. are programs able to download the entire toolkit really quickly, or do they have to download one file at a time? So I assume that if you go back to the folder where the toolkit is, you should be able to right-click and then download the entire folder at once, so they can get the whole hybrid CERT training toolkit.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously if you're familiar with Google products, if you right-click on something and then there's the download option, and you could download the entire folder. When you're downloading it though, or you could make a copy for yourself if you have a Google account, then you retain a copy of certain things within your own aspect. Like for instance, Google Forms, you won't be able to download that, but you can make a copy of and utilize that copy version. So great question. What you will notice on the Instructor Guide CERT Skills Checklist are the time estimates that are in the right-hand column next to each of those things. So that gives you a rough idea about how long it might take to actually describe, demonstrate, and then coach the students in doing that particular thing. Now those are estimates. They may take longer or shorter depending on the dynamics of your class. How well the instructor is clear, how long it takes for the students to really grasp it, etc. Also provided to you is a sample agenda. And here is the sample. Again, if you click on the link, this is provided as an editable template, enabling you to make the changes as sees fit. But what you'll notice in this is that these numbers right here, those numbers correspond with the numbers that are in the skills checklists. And so the general idea is when you go forward in the agenda, you're just basically going from, let's say, starting at number 5, and you're going, okay, let's start with 5, let's do that one. Okay, next, let's go to 6, and then to 7, and so forth, until you get all the way through them. What you will notice on this sample is that some of the skills take a lot longer to do than other skills. And those skills were found to be useful in breaking out into stations. Now, we do not suggest doing all 70 skills in a station-like environment. That would cause, it would make it really difficult to complete this in 16 hours. In fact, that would expand how long it would take based on how you utilize that time and transferring and resetting up stations and things like that. But these particular skills do work very well in stations because they have a lot of extra setup needed, some logistical considerations. But you'll also notice the breaks that are in there. There's 10-minute breaks scheduled about every hour that's needed, and that is all calculated into that full 16 hours worth of time. So utilize that sample agenda to kind of help you. Again, you're welcome to make changes as you see fit. The purpose of the training isn't about the time. It is about making sure that the students have understood and that they've been exposed to all of the principles. So build your agenda in a way where it's not going to be skipping content or curriculum, because we don't want to set up the students for failure. Okay, so the next slide. A best practice is to have the students complete the entire online portion prior to the first day of the practical portion of the training. It is up to the local program to determine how you will schedule the hands-on practical portion of training. But it has been reported that it seems to work best in 2 8-hour days. If the local program decides to break that 16 hours down into smaller segments, the best results have been found to have the students complete the entire online course prior to the first day of class. If local programs decide not to do this, you will discover some of these certain side effects, including you'll have students that did not complete the online segment assigned, and that impacts the second thing that you'll see is you'll have students that have a lot of questions because they don't understand what's going on because they didn't do the corresponding segment. So if you have ways to mitigate against that, then there may be a way to do that. But the best results have been seen to do in 2 8-hour days or to have the students complete the entire online portion before they come to the first day of class. So some of the preparation needs, obviously, there's the instructor guide, CERT skills checklist. There's some preparation prompts that are in there. Those preparation prompts point you as instructors to the basic CERT course instructor guide. So for instance, inside of the CERT skills checklist for the instructors, you'll notice that some of the skills have an asterisk attached to that. This suggests that there's some preparation needed, whether it's materials need to be gathered and enough materials for the class, or scenarios need to be made, etc. There may be some preparations needed that you would need to consider. Obviously, for the classroom portion, you're going to need a space. And since the space is going to be mostly dedicated to hands-on, then you want to make sure that there's enough space for people to actually get down and do all the hands-on practical portion of the training. You'll also need the props and resources for each of the hands-on practicals. Those aren't any different than the traditional delivery. What is commonly different, but is still useful even for the traditional delivery, is the suggestion to have at least one instructor for every 1 to 6 students. In this environment where you're going through and you want to stick to the 16 hours and not go much longer, you will find that it's hard to stick to the 16 hours. That was really pushing through all 70 points on the checklist. Programs that say that they can conduct it in shorter than 16 hours typically raise a red flag for me, where I start wondering if they're actually covering everything. Again, it's up to you, but with all the beta testing that we've done, we found that it is difficult to complete it in any less than 16 hours. But if you don't follow this instructor to student ratio, then what you'll be finding is that your students are not having the adequate coaching, and there's not enough instructors to be able to really address all of the students' needs in a timely manner. And so I'll explain kind of how that works here shortly. Also, the preparation needs is you'll also have to have your own local sanctioned certificate of course completion that you'll be issuing to students at the very end. So the materials you're going to use in the classroom include that instructor guide CERT skills checklist. That's going to be in the hands of all of your instructors. And the checklist, again, represents everything that's left over that the student has not experienced yet, that they can't experience in an online learning environment. And everything that's left over is up to your jurisdiction to then deliver. The participant CERT skills checklist is what the student will have in their hands. And then the agenda is something that will be used by both the instructors as well as the students to kind of help guide everything through. And there's a whole bunch of other pre-created materials that will help make things easy for you. And I'll show you those here in a second. There's still the usual, all the things you would see in the basic CERT course in the traditional method. Your basic CERT course instructor guide, the basic CERT course participant manuals, and all of the equipment and materials that are needed, those are still all needed in this environment. What, however, is oftentimes different is you do not have a PowerPoint up, because the PowerPoint constitutes the lecture portion of the training. You don't really have time to lecture anymore. You're just going from one skill to the next, and it's all very hands-on. Here's some of the templates in the toolkit I want to show you. The Hybrid CERT Program Toolkit is this Google Drive. And there's a whole bunch of pre-made tools and scenarios to kind of help you out with some of the skills on the checklist. So if you go to that link, you'll go to the toolkit, and you'll notice there's a folder called Samples for CERT Skills Checklist. And if you go in there, these various samples correspond with the number in the CERT Skills Checklist. And these are some tools that you could utilize to help you out with some of those things. Help minimize some of the preparation needs that you have. Again, these are just some samples or tools. What you want to use for your local program is up to you. But some of the work has been done. If these are found useful to you, then you're welcome to utilize those. Just like we talked about in the previous webinar, how you prepare your instructors will also have a very big impact on how the classroom portion rolls out. Your instructors need, all of them need to be ready and able to coach every single skill that's in there. This is oftentimes a little bit different than you'll see from the traditional class, where sometimes instructors kind of hone in on maybe a couple of modules that they are used to. And they know the skills for there, but they're not used to the other skills from the other modules. And so our pro tip to you is, before the class starts, well before that, make sure you meet with all of your instructors, review the instructor guide, CERT skills checklist, and make sure that they understand how to conduct all of those. Again, there's going to be a learning curve for your instructors. They are used to the traditional format, which means they're going to want to just stand up and lecture. But there is no lecturing. In fact, it's just from one skill to the next. There's little to no PowerPoints. It's very hands-on, very interactive, which is a positive thing, because then the value to your students of this entire learning experience goes way up, because it has not been death by PowerPoint. Just as a following note to preparing your instructors, when you meet with your instructors at the beginning, go through these steps or these questions with every single skill. What I'm describing to you right now is kind of how you would go through the training locally to help your instructors get up to par, so that all of those instructors understand the skills, everybody's on the same page, so that when you do that classroom portion, it rolls fairly smoothly. So the questions, as you can see, is, are you as the instructor, right, comfortable with that skill? are what is needed to prepare for that skill and how that skill is to be conducted. So you'll want the whole methodology lined out. This is how it is in the traditional course. This isn't any different than in the traditional course, but some train the trainer best practices in place. But is very much needed because of this learning curve that your instructors will go through. You'll also want to know, where is this particular skill located in the instructor guide? And then your instructors will also want to be familiar with where that's at in the participant manual, so that when they are trying to encourage their students to turn to that page in their participant manual, they'll be able to direct them in the correct way. What's also very important is this bullet point right here, that your instructors know the technique, the correct way to actually implement that particular skill, so that your instructor can coach the skill, making sure that the student understands it correctly. Your instructor can demonstrate it, describe it, and coach it in the best way possible. You'll also want to know how much time is needed for each of those skills so that you can time yourselves appropriately. And then our pro tip to you is to go through each of these points for every skill while doing the instructor skills training. So just as an example for you, I'm going to go to the instructor guide CERT skills checklist. And if you look at number 5 in the instructor guide CERT skills checklist, I'll zoom in for you. Number 5 is it's in unit 1, and it's a comprehension-based activity, and there's some preparation needed for that. It's about participating in an activity that emphasizes working together with unfamiliar people, problems, tools, surroundings in a time-compressed environment. You'll see the page numbers, that's right there. So there's where it's found. And hopefully your instructors can go to those pages and familiarize themselves with where it's located on the page. And then you'll notice that it takes about 10 minutes, but some of the materials you might need for this, what might be prepared for that, you might need some tools or materials associated with that. So for example, if you go to the Basic CERT Training Instructor Guide in Unit 1, and you go to those particular pages, the page numbers are pages 3 and 4 in Unit 1. So if you go to page 3 and 4, sorry, as internet is slow and the pages are kind of refreshing up. You'll want to make sure to go to the associated page. And you'll notice on the page associated to that particular skill, there's some instructions. And you'll want to be able to follow those instructions. If it's an exercise, like that particular one suggests, then follow that exercise. I'm going to just leave that alone. But that's just as one example. Another example would be if you go to the skills-based activity, number 29, on the instructor guide CERT skills. So here's number 29. It's about demonstrating how to dress and bandage a wound, including the pressure bandage, tying the bandage if no tape is available, and manage the amputations and securing an impaled object. Now, what you'll notice if you go to those particular pages, like on in the instructor guide, it's the last 2 sentences on page 18 in the basic CERT course instructor guide. Or on page 10 in the basic CERT course instructor guide, it's that second paragraph as well as step number 4 that you'll see on there. You'll notice the words are assuming that you as the instructor already know how to do that. So the question becomes, do all of your instructors know how to apply the various types of bandaging and how to do all of those? Don't assume that your instructors know how to do it. Do a review with them to make sure that they actually know how to do those particular skills. The preparation needed for this skill is obviously some materials, and you need enough materials for the students. So I'm just showing you a few examples so that you can kind of get a good idea on how to approach each of these skills when you're doing that preparation aspect. Another example would be question number, or skill number 55. So this particular skill is a comprehension-based activity. It is the search and rescue size-up activity where the students are given a scenario. And what's in here, there is a sample provided. If you click on that, it'll go straight to the folder where all of those are in. And you'll notice that number 55 is listed right there. So unit 55, number 7, building damages for search and rescue size-up activity. And so you can utilize that pre-created tool to help you doing that. You don't have to. It's just something kind of created to help you out. But there are some preparations that are needed for that particular skill. Sorry, I'm hearing some clicking. All right, another example would be number 61 on the CERT skills checklist. In unit 7, this is a skill. The instructors need to be able to not only describe and demonstrate this, but then also coach the students in doing it correctly. So the students need to demonstrate how to actually do that so that the instructor can check that off. But something you'll find is there are many instructors that don't even know the correct hold for the arms for the person doing the carry on the torso. So make sure that the technique and the understanding of the technique is very well covered so that your instructors understand how to do the technique, but then also can therefore coach the students in doing that skill accurately. Because if your students leave the class and they didn't perform the skill correctly, then you're setting them up for failure. They assume that that's how it's done because nobody ever corrected me and that's just how it happened. So another example is number 13. And I point this out because of the nature of it. This is an optional one, but you'll find this being described in the instructor guide on page II and on page 8 in the instructor guide. And you'll notice it just says, hey, if your local jurisdiction has basic crime protocols, then you'll want to include that here. There's no content, there's no additional information. It's left up to you as a program to build that in. It's in the instructor guide, but it becomes optional, depending on what you guys do. And then you would have to follow that accordingly. So there's some examples right there of various different types of some of the skill sets that you might want to be considering for those points that I was talking about on the slide deck. Again, making sure that the instructor feels comfortable with each skill, and making sure that you have all of the materials needed, the scenarios built, that you're clear on how the skill is going to be conducted. And then also helping the instructor know where it's located in their basic CERT course instructor guides. And very importantly, knowing how to conduct the technique of that skill correctly so that they can then coach that skill appropriately. So make sure that there's enough attention to your instructors ahead of time so that they can do all of those. Just as discussed in the previous webinar, just really quickly, prepare your students. This comes simply by sending reminders. You're just reminding them on various frequencies to make sure that they complete the entire online training prior to the first day of class, that they are providing a copy of their certificate of online portion completion so that they can give that to the instructor in class and they can check that one off of the skills checklist. And then obviously helping your students know what to bring versus what you're providing them in the class. So now let's go ahead and take a deep dive into how to conduct that hands-on classroom portion of the training. We're going to talk about roles and responsibilities, the classroom layout, following the agenda, the patterns of activities, as well as the disaster simulation. And then what you'll notice right here, there's a link for some guidance on ways to conduct the classroom training in times of pandemic. And that tool is provided to you as well. That's in the toolkit. So some of the roles that you'll find in this delivery format, some of the best practices and ways to do this. Obviously, you'll have a course manager who is managing all the paperwork, getting the registrations, all the registration management, all of that aspect there. You will also have a facilitator. The facilitator is the one who stands in front and center in the classroom. They're the ones who track the time, make sure that everything is staying on time. They're the ones that initiate the next step. They're the ones that conduct the full classroom activities. You also have group coaches. Now, the group coaches are some of your instructors, but they act as a coach. They're assigned to a group, and the suggestion is no more than 6 students per instructor, because if you do more than that, you set it up so that your instructor can't adequately coach while all of the student groups are performing skills on each other. You don't want more than 2 or 3 groups for one instructor to be focusing on. So the group coach will conduct some of the small group activities. They're the ones who really help describe, demonstrate, and coach each skill. And the group coach is the one who does of each skill as the student performs them correctly. And then just as a suggestion, there may be a logistics support person because all these other people are busy doing their other things. You might want an extra hand to help get some of the next materials in so that you can utilize your time wisely so you can stay within that 16 hours and not go much longer. Here is an example of the classroom layout. You'll notice the facilitator in the front of the classroom and a group coach assigned to a table. So you'll want to assign students into groups with an instructor or group coach. It's best to keep the instructor to student ratio to no more than 6 students per every 1 instructor. And the students get paired in groups of 2 or 3. So as they do skills on each other, this student would do a skill on their partner, or maybe there's a threesome so that the instructor can just focus on either 2 groups of 3 or 3 groups of 2. This way, the students can be adequately observed and coached to ensure that the skill the student performed was done correctly. And then the instructor can, with good conscience, sign off the skill that student performed. This is also a good practice to help with time management as multiple pairs of students are performing the skills simultaneously. This kind of I'll explain here kind of one of those other questions is, what is the preferred classroom size? And does it impact time? You'll realize that if the classroom is this size with 3 groups of 6 students, so 18 students, it still takes the same amount of time because each group, their students are paired together, they're still performing the skills on each other. Every group is working at the exact same time, and each group coach is then observing and coaching their small group. So this enables you to either expand or contract the size of your class for as big or as small as you want. And the time frame still basically stays the same. Granted, there might be some logistical times to consider because there's more materials that have to be moved depending on how many students that you have. The caveat to this is, how many instructors do you have? If you have more instructors, then you can have more students in class. If you have less instructors, then you have less students in the class. So your instructor ratio determines basically your class size. If you can get more people to go through the CERT Train the Trainer class, or if your local program can sanction more instructors, then that enables you. But make sure your instructors are ready and prepared so that they understand how to coach each of those various skills. But again, the facilitator is in front of the classroom. That facilitator is keeping track of that time aspect. They're saying, okay, group coaches, go ahead and start skill number 5. And then the group coaches might work with their small body and do skill number 5 together. Or maybe there are certain ones that go together as an entire class where the whole class is working together on something. It depends by the various skills. But then that way, each paired group of students are conducting that skill, are being coached by that skill at the same time, and there's adequate observation and feedback from the instructors. Again, if you don't follow this model, then you'll imagine missing instructors from various tables, and 1 or 2 instructors cannot adequately observe, watch, coach, give feedback, and check off that that student has actually performed that skill.
Hey, James?
Yes.
I'm going to pause and step in real quick right here. There's a question about, do the instructors that are coaches, do they need to be certified and trained? And I'm going to have you answer real quick, and then I'm going to give kind of the overall state level, FEMA level guidance on instructors. So as you guys are rolling this out in Utah, did you guys have any kind of certification that's required for these group coaches or instructors?
In the state of Utah, we encouraged all of the instructors to have gone through the CERT Train the Trainer course. However, we did have a few instructors that had not gone through the CERT Train the Trainer course, but have been involved for a period of time in teaching. They were professionals in their field, or they have been involved long enough where we felt comfortable and confident that that person knew what they were talking about. Maybe they hadn't gone through the Train the Trainer course, but we spent time in advance making sure that all of the instructors, whether or not they had gone through the Train the Trainer course, all of the instructors were adequately prepared, that they knew how to conduct all of the various skills. No, we didn't necessarily require a type of certification. And to my understanding, FEMA doesn't necessarily require they highly encourage. Here in the state of Utah, we did the same. We highly encouraged, but we worked with the limitations that we obviously had, and we prepared them in advance. Hopefully that helps. Suu-Va?
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what the state and federal guidance is for instructors. So FEMA states that typically either your course manager or lead instructor has taken the CERT trainer class, and they highly encourage that additional instructors take it as well. But understanding that the availability of the training is not it's not in such high supply that everyone can take it, plus the fact that it takes 3 days. So as long as your program properly vets any instructors delivering any modules based on what you think is best guidance, that is fine. So it's up to your program to decide support instructors, what do they need to take, additional training, what kind of background. But for your lead instructor and or course manager, they should take the trainer course. And the reason why that is the trainer course is going to help define the box for training CERT, to make sure that firefighters or EMTs, when they're teaching their modules, don't go far beyond CERT training. And you have somebody there that can reel things back or help instructors on exactly what they're teaching. So that's the same for these modules. If necessary, and provided that there's resources and time available, there might be some guidance on, hey, here's a way for you to train your instructors on how to deliver these modules. Right now, that's not available, but I'm sure many programs have developed their way of prepping the instructors for refreshers and countywide drills, which basically this is exactly what this is, right? So the refresher, it just has more components to it. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But right now, there is no rules, but for programs that don't know how to vet their own instructors and want more about, to know more about it, email us at info@nationalcert.org. That way we know that that's a need out there and we can devote some resources or try to find some guidance that's already been developed to share.
That's great. And just as a resource to everybody that's out there, obviously FEMA has produced the CERT program managers materials, that training materials, as well as the CERT trainer materials, open and available so anybody can access those and even read them so as to get a little familiar. But totally up to your jurisdiction on what kind of requirements that you want. Again, the focus would be make sure that your instructors understand how to coach those skills adequately. If any of you are familiar with the CERT Train the Trainer course, you will quickly realize that even the CERT Train the Trainer course does not teach an instructor how to apply a bandage the correct way or how to do the carry the correct way. The content isn't in the material, but hopefully there's time given where they can be taught how to do that if they don't already know. The agenda portion might look something like this. And as you see the agenda from previous times, that sample agenda, you'll see kind of some of those examples. Obviously, your students have not received a copy of their own basic CERT course participant manual. Up to this point, they've only seen it online. So your program might want to provide them a participant manual, also a copy of the CERT skills checklist. They need that CERT skills checklist. They're going to be the primary owners of that so that they can actually check those off. You want to introduce them to their personal protective equipment, do an icebreaker activity, assign them into groups with an instructor, conduct and sign off all of the skills, and then I'll possibly talk about the local hazards and opportunities to get involved, and then at the end they conduct that mock disaster and then do your graduation side of things. So provide each student with their own copy of the participant skills checklist and the class agenda. It is best if the students maintain responsibility for their own checklist. During class, instructors may be tempted to keep the checklist and just keep signing off one on the next and not handing it back. but doing so will make it difficult for the student to follow along. This checklist may be turned in at the end with all of the signatures to verify course completion, and then should be returned to the student for their own records. The program records basically just need, hey, did they pass it or not? And then you keep your own internal records depending on that. This could be returned to the student as they receive their official certificate of course completion at graduation. And then provide each student with their own copy of the basic CERT course participant manual. The online course references to the electronic manual throughout the online training. However, the student may not have received a physical copy until now. The physical copy is important because it's used throughout the classroom portion as a reference. And also the student can then use it from then on throughout their experience with CERT. They likely don't have personal protective equipment. So you might provide that if you're providing that. Obviously, it depends on from one jurisdiction to another. But then you'll need to direct community members to bring their own if your program's not providing it. So that kind of depends on what your jurisdiction decides. I'm going to take a bit of time on this slide. Yeah, Suu-Va?
So two quick things. One is a question about no final exam on this agenda. So I just want you to confirm that there's a final exam in the hybrid training that the individual gets when they do the online portion. But once you get to the in-person portion, there's no final exam again. However, programs are able to, if they want to, do their own post-test again, especially when you have a long lead time between rolling out the online training and doing the in-person portion to retest your participants or customize your own question. But as far as the guidance with the hybrid training is so far, there's no second final exam for the in-person portion. Is that correct?
That is correct. Because the online learning environment required the student to pass with 70% or higher, then that enables you as a program manager to say, oh, I'm confident in that aspect. I don't have to give them another exam to test their knowledge on the lecture portion. Obviously, throughout the hands-on portion, they've been kind of getting this refresher as well. So that refresher side of things is kind of fulfilled as they conduct those hands-on aspects. But yeah, you don't have to do another final exam, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to, but you'll need to add some more time to your agenda to enable that. Those 16 hours did not include time to do another exam. The hands-on practical exam is typically the disaster simulation. Not that it's really examined as pass or fail, but they get a chance to put it to the test as per se. So the pattern of activities, this is really important to understand. Again, there's no lecturing, but you are following Train the Trainer best practices. There's those first 4 items on the checklist that you want to make sure, hey, how are we handling that? You're going to decide when and where that's going to happen. But from 5, 6, 7, and on, all the way through 70, you basically just kind of go sequentially in order. You just go from one to the next to the next. And the classroom facilitator in the front of the classroom is saying, okay, we have 10 minutes to do this activity, go. And then the coaches kind of help lead out that, or maybe they do a demonstration in front of the class for everybody to see, or whatever. I'll explain kind of how that works. The instructors need to describe, demonstrate, coach, and then they go to the next one. Simultaneous to that, the student is hearing it, seeing it, doing it, getting that checked off, and then going to the next one. Now there are these 3 different options for how some of the activities kind of work in the classroom. Some activities are best in small groups. This is where the group coach takes the lead and actually does that with the students. The facilitator just cues them, say, hey, this is what's going on. And then the group coaches take the lead, and then they verify and sign off. If it's an activity that requires the full class, this is where the facilitator takes the lead. The facilitator might describe, demonstrate, and then the coaches then coach and verify and sign off. There are some skills that take extensive setup and things like that, and so those skills would require an assigned station instructor to then describe, demonstrate, coach the skill, verify, sign off, kind of thing like that.
Hey, James.
So,
yeah. James, sorry to interrupt, but we have about 5 more minutes, and so we need to save some time for questions.
Well, you actually have until 12 o'clock, so you have 24 minutes, but we do want to save some time for
at least
questions.
30 minutes for questions. Yeah, I know we have a few slides left.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
I'll try to hurry through this. You'll want to conduct and sign off skills from each unit in the basic CERT course. There are 70 items to be signed off. That's 13 hours of skills and 3 hours for the disaster simulation. It's best to move sequentially, starting from number 5 in unit 1 and then just kind of moving forward. Unit 1 is, number 1 in it, as you can see right here, number 1 is best completed at the beginning because they have to turn in their certificate, get that checked off. Numbers 2 and 3 may be completed at any time. That makes the most sense for you. Where do you want to plug that in? Commonly, that's done at the end. Number 4 is definitely completed at the end. There's little to no lecturing or PowerPoints. It's focus on hands-on. Because the lecture portion was satisfied in the online environment, and because there are 70 skills that need to be checked off in 16 hours worth of time, there is no time for lecturing. Instructors tend to default to the traditional format of teaching and lecturing, so prepare for a learning curve. Little to no PowerPoints are used in the classroom portion. In this format, the instructor's role is to point the students to their manuals as a reference for the skill. They describe the skill, demonstrate the skill, and then coach the students as they perform the skill. Then once the skill is performed satisfactorily, then the instructor can, in good conscience, sign off that skill on the student's CERT skills checklist. Now, some activities may be conducted as an entire class, where the class facilitator may lead out on the activity. Other activities may be best in small groups, where an instructor leads the activity in the small group. And some activities may be a combination of both approaches. There are a few activities that require extensive time to set up and more time to complete than the other skills. The sample agenda that we talked about provides and shows how those can be conducted in stations. So for an example of a small group activity, look at number 53 in the CERT skills checklist. It's participate in the gathering facts activity. This is best conducted as a small group activity because it encourages more students to be involved if done in small groups than it would as an entire class. If you look at skill number 20, right here it says maintain an airway in an unconscious patient using the recovery position. This is best done as a small group activity so the students can get close and see exactly how it's done. If the skill is conducted in front of the whole class, students often report that they cannot see or cannot get close enough to understand. Number 14, right here, in the CERT skills checklist is about practicing filling out CERT forms in an instructor-led scenario. Now that's best conducted as a small group activity because it encourages more students to get that hands-on experience with each form. a sample scenario has been developed in the toolkit to help make things easy for you. And if you click on that, there's a sample scenario built in there for you. As an example for a full class activity, if you look at skill number 2 and number 3, those particular skills are about those local hazards, the CERT policies, how CERT fits in the local plan. And this is best done as an entire class because it requires a single subject matter expert to address the entire class to inform them on those subjects. It's more lecture environment. If you look at number 15 and 16, these ones are both optional. Those are about actually practicing physically organizing as a CERT team. And those are best done as an entire class because it involves every member of the class and shows them how to organize for the disaster simulation as well. Or an in-depth add-on training on triage is an example of a full class type activity following your local jurisdiction plans. The triage training is best conducted as an entire class because it may require lecturing and PowerPoint specific to that training. Since triage training is not included in the basic CERT materials, it is up to the local jurisdiction to develop their own. The future optional triage unit online may introduce the student to the general concept, but the local program will still need to train on local specifics regarding triage. And that's the same concept with any other topic, not fully taught in the basic CERT course materials. For an example of a combined full class to small group activity, take a look at number 55. As you see right here, number 55 is participate in the search and rescue size of activity. This would require each group to be assigned a scenario and then to report out to the class. Therefore, the facilitator would lead in front of the class, and the group coaches would work with their groups on their given scenario. There are a few skills where it makes sense to have the facilitator demonstrate the skill in front of everyone, and then have the students do the skill with their partner while the group coach monitors their assigned students for accuracy. So I just wanted to provide a few of those examples to you to kind of help you see some of the differences and maybe to help you understand ways that you could then conduct each of those. Next slide. My thing moved. Okay, make sure that you build in breaks because this is a high energy environment. Your students may say at the end, wow, I'm tired. But having the adequate breaks in there, the 16 hours includes 10-minute breaks for each hour and at least 2 minutes between skills, shifting from one thing to the next for logistical considerations. The additional training considerations, obviously the 16 hours is just for the required skills and activities. That does not include any of the additional content your jurisdiction may want to provide. So if you want to provide additional concepts, additional training that's not necessarily in the basic CERT course, then you'll need to build in more time. Or maybe even say, hey, we're going to meet on another day and do that particular thing on another day. So time management is really important. If you decide to add anything, don't add at the expense of other required content. Okay, so the disaster simulation. The disaster simulation is basically the same. It really hasn't changed. You conduct it how you do any normal traditional class. Obviously, FEMA's guidance, the goal here is that the student has successfully implemented all the skills learned throughout the course. So make sure you set up a simulation to do that. The final exam is satisfactorily completed through the online course. The review is completed with the practicals. Once the individual has passed off each skill, then they should participate in a mock disaster as planned and advertised by the local registered CERT program. This may happen at the end of the second day. So at the end of that 13 hours and then that last 3 hours. The disaster simulation can be set up and run however your program normally does it. However, there are some best practices to consider. Make sure that you set up the disaster simulation in advance so that the students can quickly move from the practicals into the simulation, unless you plan on doing the simulation on a separate day, apart from the skills day. Many instructors and students have reported that they would have preferred the simulation to happen on a separate day because they've been engaged all day long and it's been very busy. The idea is to run the students through the simulation 2 times, have the students switch roles the second time, followed by a debriefing or a hot wash to talk about what they learned. This will work for the station model as described in the basic CERT instructor guide, or the full simulation model that most programs are accustomed to. Make sure that the simulation is constructed to allow the student to successfully apply all the skills they learned. The disaster simulations that are built to overwhelm students often leave the students feeling unintelligent and that their time was wasted and may not meet the purpose of the simulation. Here's just an example of the suggested layout, and you'll see this described in the instructor guide CERT skills checklist. So at the very end of your course, once the online portion is completed and proof of completion is provided, and all units and skills are satisfactorily completed and signed off by an instructor, and once the individual has participated in the mock disaster where they practice the skills they have learned, then an official certificate of course completion will be issued by the local registered CERT program. The local CERT program will maintain all records at the local level. There is a sample certificate in the toolkit that your program is welcome to use. And be sure to include your sponsoring agency's logos with that. And here's an example. This is what the online certificate would look like. This is what they provide. This does not verify full course completion, but this part only proves the completion of the online portion. However, this one, just an example, is the type that would be issued by the local CERT program. And this is provided in the toolkit. So you can actually download that and utilize that, change it however you need. Your program likely already has templates for locally sanctioned certificates. But when the student is completed, this is what it looks like. The student did the online portion. They're done with that. They add that to the CERT skills checklist. All of the items in the CERT skills checklist, as decided by the local program, have been all checked off. Then those are handed to the program manager to then go through and create certificates of course completion for all the students. And then you deliver that to them. So obviously, after the course is done, understand that team building and retaining what's been learned does not happen on a one-time basis. So it's encouraged to conduct refreshers and team building activities on a regular basis. It is up to the local registered CERT program to determine what that entails. It's also up to the individual on how involved they want to be. Some may take the course for their own benefit with no interest for further involvement. Others may take the course and show interest in getting further involved. Both are great. If further interest is communicated, it's important for the program to have a way for volunteers to get involved and a role to fill. This is up to the local CERT program and sponsoring agency to determine what volunteer roles are needed. The CERT program manager's course will help program leaders develop a sustainable program plan so they can utilize volunteers in the best ways possible. So that concludes this. We're going to then go into kind of a question and answer session. The next webinar will be October 6th. We'll review those differences between the lecture portion versus the traditional classroom-based delivery, this whole hybrid versus traditional. So hopefully you can join us on October 6th. With that, Rachel will discuss ways that you can support hybrid CERT. And then Suu-Va will lead us out on the questions.
Thanks, Suu-Va. James, just real quick, I just wanted to mention if anybody would like to support specific components, such as voiceover, updated videos, additional languages, even to reduce the hands-on portion. We've had a few questions from programs. You can use your CERT program funding or individually or by an organization. Please contact us at onlinecert@utah.edu, or you can go online for a hybrid CERT donation link. And Suu-Va, turn the time over to you for questions.
Thank you. Rachel, while I'm going over the questions, can you go ahead and put the email address where participants can send questions to? So there's two. One is for technical support. So if you're doing the LMS and you have an issue with logging in or checking the modules, there's a tech support contact there. And also if you're a program manager and you have questions about implementing the hybrid CERT training, there's an email address or a SurveyMonkey where you can actually enter your questions there as well. I do want to once again thank the team at Utah. They are doing all this pro bono. So they absorb the cost of creating this great training and then are also absorbing the cost of making it free nationwide and providing themselves as experts to help programs and help create guidance documents that can help us out. I say all that because they do have full-time jobs, which means that as great as it would be for them to turn around tomorrow and have all the updated requests done, they're not going to get it done that quickly. So we'll slowly work with them, the NCA that is, to try to provide this in a timely manner and also provide additional webinars as needed so that we can help program managers continue to roll this out properly. So here are some questions that I did capture during the webinar that we'll go through. I did get disconnected for a few minutes, so I missed a couple of questions, possibly. If I did, just go ahead and type it again. So here it is. Can we use the online course for training refreshers for our teams? Yes. So the training itself is basically another resource, right? The guidance that was presented in this webinar and the last webinar is how to properly utilize the hybrid CERT training as an alternative solution to regular CERT basic training so that FEMA can approve it. So that's why all these rules and requirements are in there. But once someone's already taken CERT training, if you want them to use it as a refresher, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to replace a module that you're doing in classroom-based with the online portion, you can do that. If you already did the classroom-based training, but you missed a module too because of COVID, you can have your participants take the online portion, make sure you bring them in for any relevant in-person portion, and you can use that to supplement your regular training. So it's not one or the other. It's not like, oh, you either have to do all classroom-based or you have to do all hybrid. You can mix and match, provided you follow the guidance. FEMA guidance is very simple. They have to have the lecture portion of the CERT training, all 9 modules. They have to do the hands-on skills training, all 9 modules, and disaster simulation. Those are the 3 core components. And you'll see that in both the hybrid CERT training implementation as well as the classroom-based implementation. As a program, you can mix and match as necessary for your program and for you to give a certificate to your participants saying that they've completed CERT training. But once again, that certificate is based on them completing the full CERT training, not just half of CERT training. And I'll touch on that just a little bit later with another question. The question about the time. So you saw on the agenda, the 16 hours actually does have time built in for breaks and for lunches. So that's accounted for in the 2 full days of in-person skills demonstration and disaster simulation. How do you do some of the lists and carries on the instructional list? And so we did not cover this in this webinar, and I don't know if we have time today to cover it. The hybrid CERT training wasn't developed with COVID in mind. And as we're rolling out this training, we're not trying to position it as a, here's how you do it during COVID. We might answer a couple of questions here and there, but to be able to give you good guidance on how to do it with social distancing, it's going to take its own webinar, and it'll take a lot more time because every jurisdiction is a little bit different. We can think about providing a webinar where there are programs that have done classroom-based training and give you tips on what they've done, but it'll be very hard for Utah or the NSA or even FEMA to provide you with any hard guidance on how to do it, because we always look to local guidance on what to do and what is safe for classroom-based training. We can definitely provide you with documents and stuff that we do in our states or in other states, but we can't really provide you with a standard that you can utilize. Do students have a checklist prior to class? That's a very good question. So James, is there a checklist that programs can send to their participants to make sure that they're ready for the class, whether it's make sure you're taking on the online training, make sure you are dressed properly, make sure blah, blah, blah?
No, there's not that kind of a checklist. That communication is fully up to the local program to communicate as clearly as they decide. Again, the student steps are basically take the online course, come to class with their online portion proof of completion, that certificate. Anything else that they need to bring is up to you to communicate. If the students need to bring pencils and pens, or if they need to buy their own equipment, or if they need to do whatever kind of thing, that's up to you to communicate.
Okay, great. So I think that this is something that many program managers would appreciate. And what we can do is we can ask programs who have rolled out this training, who have created their own checklist for participants, to share it as a template and allow programs to kind of see what is there. But there's nothing created so far. And really the hybrid CERT training, once again, is just a resource that your program utilizes, right? It doesn't replace how you register your participants. It doesn't replace how you market your participants or who you train. The idea is that instead of telling your participants to come to class on day one, they're basically doing online training and you're providing them with that link. So yeah, there's no PowerPoint in the in-person training. May we do comprehension option items on our own delivery? Yes. So just like regular CERT basic, you can add to an extent. Just be reminded that when you add, you're making more time and you cannot remove. So you can't say, oh, well, we'll keep the 26 hours, but we're going to add this and remove this instead and keep the same amount of time. You can't do that. FEMA stipulates that CERT training means that they have a certain amount of training, and it's basically everything in the manual. And you can add to that if it fits your program or it fits your jurisdiction or your local disaster applications. Our students are required to complete the online course followed by the final 4 hours of hands-on lunch graduation pandemic. Okay, so this question is basically saying that their program is handling the classroom-based or the in-person portion differently. And this is not specific to the hybrid CERT training, because I imagine that if they were doing all classroom-based, they would probably strip it down too. I can't really tell you that, hey, you can't do that. CERT training is not this, because I understand that even with the pandemic, many jurisdictions have a requirement to deliver some kind of training, and they have to, and they use CERT as part of that training. So I know that in many people's eyes, they think, well, some training is better than no training, and during the pandemic, we just can't do certain training. Until FEMA comes down with a hammer on that, I'm not going to say, hey, you can't do that. That's not CERT training. I understand times have changed. you have to check in with your state CERT coordinator to be able to say, hey, what's our guidance in our state for delivering CERT training during the pandemic? Can we do it at 80%? Can we remove this? Can we remove that? In California, my guidance is, hey, you can take it down to 70% as long as once it's safe to do so, you give the opportunity for the participants to come back in and take the remaining 30%. So you give them the training that they missed. And also you might want to consider looking at the certificate you give out and altering it. So that way it doesn't show that it's the full CERT training when it's not, especially if you're going to utilize these volunteers for disaster response or keep them as part of your cadre, because you want to make sure that when you say CERT training, it implies something, right? Any instructor or any leader in your team knows that CERT training means they've been trained this, this, and this, not, oh, was it CERT training during COVID or CERT training outside of COVID? So those are some of the things you have to look at. But understanding that no matter what government's going to tell you, hey, you just have to do certain training. You might have elected officials are putting pressure on you. So do what's right with your program. Just understand that FEMA guidance is still doing everything. The hybrid CERT training guidance is still doing everything. Make sure you check in with your sponsor agency and your CERT program to do what's right for you. Okay. A cheat sheet for hands-on versus digging into the manual. Yeah, I think when you're rolling out the training program, you're going to find that you're going to want to create a lot more resources than what's already offered by the Utah team. The Utah team developed resources based on how Utah has done CERT training and what they've seen and issues raised from the field. Of course, some program managers, they don't raise issues. They're like, oh, I just created it myself, and that's why Utah hasn't already created it. But as we hear more and collect more resources and templates from other programs, we'll look to see what we can share through the online tools so that other programs can benefit from it as well. This includes the documents. Many documents are in PDFs. We'll work to try to create those and make them more editable in Word form or PowerPoint form. Just understand that not everything's going to be transferred right away, but we will work to see what we can do immediately and make those available. We've already covered the certified instructors and no final exam on this agenda. Once again, your program can implement additional exams. The final exam that is found on the online training is based on the information and the training that the participant gets from the online training. Obviously, without the hands-on portion, you can't really test that like you normally would in a classroom-based environment. So you can implement that training before they do the hands-on training and disaster simulation or after, at your discretion. With that, I think that's all the questions I saw and was able to capture. James and Rachel, did you see any other questions or Danielle?
On the editing side of things, if all of the items in the toolkit that are meant to be editable, there is an editable version of that in the toolkit. All the items that are not meant to be edited are just in PDF format. Hopefully that helps you.
Thank you. So maybe when you open the file, you just open the PDF version and people saw all of that. So that does make sense. Okay, we're looking for more questions. They couldn't find an editable version of the checklist. So James, are we going to have an editable version of the checklist?
Yeah, the checklist is not meant to be edited. From a program perspective, if it's optional and you decide not to do that, then you would just simply not do it. But what we don't necessarily want people doing is going through and making a bajillion different versions of that checklist in hopes that it kind of helps standardize that across the nation.
Thank you, James. I have a question about the ETA for the California LMS launch. So the developers gave all the files to our LMS team last week on Monday. Our LMS team is doing their due diligence. They're going slide by slide and making sure that all the ADA accessibility, compatibility is there, making sure all the knowledge checks works properly. So any day now, it should be ready to go. It's just a matter of them going through everything and then for the developers to make all those corrections. I'll be sending out an email on how to access it once it's available, but it should be any day now. It could be as soon as this webinar is done, although probably not, but any day now. Triage is going to take a couple more weeks. That is because we wanted to make sure that the regular module is done first, and we still want to review the triage module to make sure that it includes all the proper information and can work as a self-contained module, because many participants may take the regular training and then months later take the triage training. You want to make sure that it doesn't seem like, hey, you just took unit 3, so now you can take triage. It can be a standalone with that kind of information. Is there a 2019-2020 participant guide and instructor guide on the drive? James, do you guys have a copy of the updated manuals in the Google Drive?
No, those are provided on FEMA's CERT website at ready.gov/CERT.
Okay. LMS stands for Learning Management System. It's a platform that allows you to take training and captures your progress. So it's it's just the name of the platform. There's many different LMSs out there. And actually, there might just be 2 or 3 major vendors that provide most of the learning management systems. And many agencies like Cal OES have contracts with them. In Cal OES, we use Cornerstone On Demand LMS. Let's see. I don't see any more questions. So once again, if you do have questions, just provide that feedback at the survey link. There's also a survey list that you can sign up for updates on the hybrid CERT training, in which if you can share that again. So that way, if with this new webinars that we're going to push out or new guidance or significant changes, we can send that update out to the programs. We're going to rely very heavily on programs to provide feedback so that we can provide additional guidance on how to implement this program properly across the US. And if your state or territory is not on the list, they just have to email us really quickly, your state or territory CERT coordinator, to say they approve the training. And that's all it takes. It doesn't take anything more than that, which is to have some kind of approval from your state coordinator. Okay, last chance, 3 more minutes. Okay, this recording will be available on the onlinecert.org website, and I believe you can go ahead and access the last webinar there as well already. And next week's webinar will be at the same start time and same thing. I did notice somebody mentioned that it conflicts with another event, and unfortunately, we can't account for all the different conflicts that are out there. But thank God that the webinars will be recorded, and people who have to have another commitment can go ahead and watch the recording. With that, Danielle, you can go ahead and hit the stop, and then James and Rachel, if you can stay on for another quick minute.